Yeah, I still see people joining, but I suggest that we start now. Yeah, welcome to our SFS seminar. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Konrad Ott, who will give a talk on theoretical concept of strong sustainability. Uh, Before I introduce Konrad in detail, let me say a few words about our International Alliance of Societies for a Sustainable Future, SFS. We were strongly motivated by the fragility of existing networks, particularly political networks. And our vision is to leverage the robust and stable international scientific network to alert globally the public, but also decision makers on the acute need for action in the sustainability crisis. And we also recommend measures for socio-ecological transformation. Our alliance is not limited to natural science and technology, but spans all disciplines across borders and cultures. That's why I'm particularly happy to have somebody from the field of philosophy and ethics today, Professor Konrad Ott, who in fact doesn't need much introduction. He is very well known. He was born 1959. He's a German philosopher, but also internationally well known, as I mentioned already. And he's also environmental ethics expert. He focuses primarily on bioethics and environmental ethics. Few points concerning his biography. From 97 to 2012, he was professor at the University of Greifswald on environmental ethics. And since 2012, he is professor at Kiel University and he has a professorship of philosophy and environmental ethics. He has many honorary positions. To save time, I mention only one, which I find particularly impressive. For 9 years, from 2000 to 2008, he was member of the German Federal Government's Advisory Council on the Environment. And as I said, there are many other honorary positions. And what I also find extremely impressive is his publication record and his many important publications. But in order to save time, I will not go into details here and rather ask Konrad to start his talk. We are very much looking forward to your presentation, Konrad.
Thank you, Franz. Thank you for this kind introduction and invitation. And the theoretical concept of strong sustainability, I will outline in my talk, goes back to the years of the membership in the Environmental Advisory Council. So this is the roots, and the theoretical work came somewhat later. That's what you all know, the Sustainable Development Goals. There is a catalog of 17 goals with more than 150 sub-goals, and these goals and sub-goals stand in different relationships to each other. Some are contradictory, some are supplemental, some are neutral. But the question remains whether a catalog of goals, which are nice to have, of course, is the final word of the meaning of sustainability. And I will present an alternative to the SDG, which will embed the idea of the SDG at a certain point of the theoretical development. What I can offer to you is a layer model. There is some epistemology in the background. I will be silent about. The layer model is already a simplification. And I distinguish between 7 layers of a discourse on sustainability. The first layer is intellectual history, which starts in the 18th century. The second layer is about ethical premises and principles. And I identify three sources of normativity: justice in general, future ethics in particular, and environmental ethics, which is about values in nature. And the third layer is about competing concepts as SDG, inclusive wealth, which is an economic concept, and the debate between weak and strong sustainability, which I take as very important. The fourth layer is about principles, rules, and objectives, so it becomes more specific. You might take the metaphor of an airplane, and in the first three layers, the airplane is very high in the air, and then it goes down to earth, and the layers 4 till 7. Because the layer number 5 is about guidelines, the layer number 6 is about fields of actions, and the SDGs are fields of action. And then, of course, we have objective, we have instrument, we have policy making, and so on and so on. The layers 2 and 3 are the theoretical core. The layers 4 and 5 are bridging principles between the core and the set of applications. And 6 and 7 are applications as such. And the SDGs are then find their place on layer number 6 and 7. Very briefly, I go through, as I would say, that the intellectual history is about traditions. The idea is about principles. The concepts are what they are, conceptual approaches. And then we have rules, and then we have guidelines. And in the application sphere, we have specific concepts for agriculture, nature conservation, and whatever is of interest to practical sustainability, of course, climate change, of course, as I must say in Kiel, the ocean and marine protect. And finally, and this is the point number 8, I want to make a kind of an epistemological reflection. Do we have a concept, a theory, a frame, or perhaps even a paradigm? Now I start with the first layer, and the word Nachhalt was coined in German forestry in 713 by Karl Hans Karlowitz. And at the end of the 18th century, there is a wonderful phrase by Thomas Jefferson. In former times, there were great presidents of the US in former times. And Jefferson said, the earth belongs in usufruct to the living. Usufruct is a concept that goes back to Roman antique times. It means you have to keep a substance intact over time and pass the substance to posterity, but you are entitled to enjoy the fruits of this substance. And maybe this is the basic intuition, whatever the substance may be. In the German tradition, there was Justus von Liebig about the fertility of the soils and fertilization. So keep the substance of fertile soils intact and improve fertility in order to improve the yields. And in Kiel, there was Karl August Möbius, who applied Karlowitz's idea to marine resources, to the oyster banks. And so he opens the field of the sustainable use of marine resources already in the 19th century. And then there were some environmental movements before the First World War, but then there was a dark age, and the idea was lost for more than two generations. It came back in the 70s, and then there is a famous definition of the so-called Brundtland report in Our Common Future, quoted thousands and thousands times, but recognize that in the definition there are only basic needs. Nature has vanished from the definition, and only the needs of human beings remained in the definition. There were reasons why this definition was coined, and then I would say we have a long story about sustainability going back to Karlowitz and maybe even to ancient times. And we have a short history of sustainability that starts with a Brundtland. But from the perspective of the old history, the Brundtland report is only one source among many. It's not exceptional. It's only one contribution to a very long tradition. I move to layer number two, ethics. And here we must to make our mind clear about a theory of justice. Personally, I'm a Rawlsian. And Rawls said, okay, we must bring our beliefs, our basic intuitions about fairness in accordance and in a reflective equilibrium with principle, and the principle are chosen in a very specific situation, in a so-called original position behind a wheel of ignorance, which covers the individual features of the persons and leaves only personhood intact. And in this original position, reasonable person who have a sense of justice would choose a principle of freedom and a system of liberty rights, equality of opportunities, and fair chances to reach attractive positions in society, a principle of solidarity and a minimum strategy for a safe minimum for all. And there is a fourth principle, a fair intertemporal legacy. You find it in the paragraph 44 of the theory of justice. It's about a saving schedule. It's about a fair intertemporal bequest package, but there is no environmental ethics in Rawls. So you can see freedom, equality, solidarity, the principles of the French Revolution, and additionally, a principle of sustainability. So these are the principles. And the second source of normativity is environmental ethics, which reasons about, or reasons in an unconstrained way about human nature relations. And here we have mapped types of argument about reliance values. Persons, people, groups are reliant upon natural resources for their livelihood and so on. But nature is not just for a bare life, it is also for a good, flourishing, and rich human life. And here we have the so-called eudaimonia in the Aristotle means a good life. Eudaimonistic values of nature as the beauty of nature, biophilic values, maybe even making place, Heimat, or all these things. So nature contributes to a good and flourishing human life in many respects. And then, of course, we have intertemporal responsibility, that is future generations. We have attitudes and virtues in man-nature interactions, which is environmental virtue ethics. And then we ask for the possible inherent moral value in nature. And I would argue that at least animal welfare, higher sentient creatures should be included in our thinking about sustainability. But I'm critical against animal rights. If you want to deepen this debate, we can do it in the discussion. It's about animal ethics. And then, of course, in environmental ethics, we have deep ecology, spiritual ecosophies, but I will remain silent um, on them because they go beyond the paradigm of the scientific worldview of our European modernity. My concept is dubbed deep anthropocentrism, that is 1 to 4, with add-on, which add-ons are more or less virtual, not mandatory, in 5 and 6. And so you now have 4 principles of justice, and I have the concept of deep anthropocentrism with some add-ons. This is the ethical dimension. And then we have basic concepts. Very weak sustainability would be continued growth of GDP, future wealth, material wealth, monetary wealth. And some years ago, an economist was screaming at me and said, "We in the present, we are the poor. The future will be rich because there will be growth of GDP. They will be far richer than we are. Why should we care so much about them? We are the poor." Is it right? Don't believe so. Then we have weak sustainability. This is about substitutability of nature by technologies and man-made capital. And the measure is genuine saving. The idea is non-declining utility over time, but how is nature related to utility? Do we need nature to our human welfare? How much do we need? Can we substitute? And this is a quite interesting question. Then some say, okay, we should be precautious. We should adopt a safe minimum standard against perfect substitutability. We should conserve critical natural capital. And then there is intermediate sustainability. But intermediate sustainability has a problem with criticality. What's really critical in nature? And if you adopt a precautionary principle and if you adopt a safe minimum standard, asking how safe is safe enough for future generations, then you move slow by slow to strong sustainability. Strong sustainability requires conservation and investment of and in natural capital. Of course, we presuppose a concept of natural capital. Capitals are stocks that yields flows. And therefore, strong sustainability wants to preserve, conserve, restore, and act on behalf of the different stocks and funds of natural capital. And very strong sustainability demands respect for inherent value in nature. It goes back to the demarcation problem. So I said, okay, animal welfare is a plausible candidate for a moderate, very strong sustainability. And then, of course, you must make now a reasonable choice. As you're making choices between theoretical approaches, one has to make a reasonable discursive choice and say, okay, I say this concept is better justified, it is better substantiated than other ones. And The different concepts of sustainability can be regarded as being proposals for fair intergenerational bequest packages in the sense of roles. Um, so, how green is your sustainability? That's, of course, the question. And here comes my argument for strong sustainability. I argue that natural capital is essential for human welfare. I'm critical against the economic framework of weak sustainability about discounting, maximizing net present value, and a high degree of substitutability. So, discounting, substituting, compensation are critical points against weak sustainability. And I argue that ecosystem services are really hard to substitute one by one because natural capital has very specific features as multifunctionality, the status of collective goods, retinity structure, and so on and so on. And another argument are the concessions which come from the side of weak sustainability because safe minimum standard, precautionary principle, total economic value speak in favor of a stronger variant of sustainability. And many contingent valuation studies have resulted in the insight that widespread preferences for conservation and restoration of nature are in our population, and we have to respect such preferences, even from an economic point of view. There are some other not so important argument. Important still is that we should take seriously the uncertainty concerning future preferences. If we really do not know them, they could be more biophilic than ours. And this we must take into account. And the precautionary criterion better tells us better to err on the side of cautions. So I would say there is a set of arguments by which the concept of strong sustainability can be substantiated. So, and that's my proposal for a reasonable choice on the conceptual layer. The heart, or at the heart of strong sustainability, there is a constant natural capital rule. And this constant natural capital rule can be specified to a system of management rules with respect to non-renewable resources, to renewable or living or non-living funds, to critical impacts, including atmospheric CO2 emissions, investment strategy in natural capital, and what is investment in economic parlance is restoration in ecological parlance. And then we envision or have a notion of natural capital as critical heterogeneous stock of resources, non-living and living funds, and this should be the bequest package for future generations in a Rawlsian sense of a fair bequest package. And natural capital is seen as network of nested elements of nature and by which the ecosystem service flow cascade now starts. And then we have supporting, providing, regulating, and cultural ecosystem services. In this slice, there is a whole philosophy of nature, of living nature embedded. What's life? What's neck entropy? What are stocks? What are funds? What are organisms? What is fertility? What is genetic information? So, behind this constant natural capital room, there opens a field for philosophy of nature. And personally, in the years to come, I want to compare this philosophy of nature with Kant, Hegel, Schelling, and so on, who had ideas about organisms and ideas about life on Earth. And here at this point, I can embed the legacy of the famous conservationists Aldo Leopold, the land ethics, by a principle: use all land and sea only in such way of kinds which protect or enhance the fertility, resilience, and diversity of the ecological systems. If fertility, resilience, and diversity have been impaired in the past, try to restore them fully if possible. That's a principle. And now I move to the guidelines which bridge the theoretical core with the applications. And then we have the so-called three-pillar model. You have heard about the three-pillar model of ecology, economy, social life, and perhaps the fourth pillar would be politics. And now I can integrate the four-pillar model and say, okay, the ecological pillar is about the land ethics. It's about resilience, fertility, beauty, richness of nature. Economy is about degrowth of material input and pollution, smart technologies, recycling, urban mining, upgrading, and so on and so on. And I would see the technology departments uh, as think tanks for this economic pillar. In the social life, the social pillar, I have new models of wealth beyond consumerism, different patterns of recognition in a Hegelian sense, virtues, and some ideas about sufficient lifestyles. In politics, I would go a step beyond the democracy we have, a kind of Habermasian deliberative democracy, which puts some emphasis to environmental policy making. So in politics is environmental deliberative democracy. And now I can say, what is a transformation? A transformation would be concreteness in a Hegelian sense, concrescere, growing together. The pillars are not pillars, not isolated stockpiles. They should concrete, and such concreteness would be what many people would say, call a transformation. In sustainability, on reflection, we have some cross-cutting topics. There is a relationship between rules and objectives. Strong sustainability is rule-based, but environmental policy making is based on objectives, as well below 2-degree global mean temperature, climate neutrality at a specific point in time, or something like this. And then, how can one follow a rule by reaching an objective? And if we reach an objective, can we be sure that the rule has been followed? So it's about rule following and objective reaching. And then, of course, we have scales, and scales are highly important in our scattered world. We have analytical models about driver pressure, state impact, and response, the so-called DIPSIR model, and we must be clear about sustainability and time. So, a philosophy of time is included in sustainability, not just a philosophy of nature, but also a philosophy of time. And I wish to distinguish between chronos, which is time as passing by, kinesis, which is the how stocks and fund change over time, and the kairos, which is political time. Political time is about windows of opportunity, about chances and missing chances and all these things. And then, of course, we have political institutions. Now, I have 7 more minutes. Going back to reality. And Rawls argued one must go from the highly artificial or original position back to real life. The first step going back is take a look in your constitution. And in Germany, we have Article 20a about conservation of the natural conditions of life and the animals. Another step would be uh, institutionalize a department for collective goods, ecosystem services, and all things as land. Ein richtiges Landwirtschaftsministerium. Ein richtiges. Okay. Then, of course, we have national sustainability programs and strategy, as we have in Germany. And on the international level, we have international environmental regimes. UNFCCC, well below 2 degrees. Convention on Biological Diversity stops the loss. United Nations Convention Law of the High Sea. We do here in Kiel a lot to improve the UNCLOS. Then, of course, CITES is about trading with endangered species products. And we have now, of course, the SDG processes. And what we have on the level of institutions are epistemic communities, as IPCC, as IPBAS, or as our or your epistemic community, which is in the making. And epistemic communities contribute in many, many respects to the environmental regimes, but also to strategies on the national level. So we have to strengthen, therefore, I support your initiative. We have to strengthen the epistemic communities at the science policy interface. The airplane goes down and down and down and touches land. We have specific concepts for nature conservation, different land use categories as national parks, biosphere reserves, wilderness areas, national heritage sites. We should move in fisheries away from the quotas. The quotas are a mess, and we should have a model as safe biological limits of fish stocks. With respect to the ocean, we can operationalize a metaphor of ocean health, which has been done here in Kiel. And in climate change, we have contraction and convergence becoming net zero as soon as possible. And then emission egalitarianism in some respects. So we have sets of political objectives on different scales. And transition management is about scaling. And of course, scales are important. But if many nations and states will make policies, maybe we will have a highly fragmented and scattered world in the future because some countries may reach strong sustainability while others will fail. One consequence will be about migration. But I will be silent on migration. Ocean health, maybe I can skip this and can come to the result. The sources of normativities are quite clear and robust. we have some, that's the principle of justice and the discourse on values in nature. I think this is clear. Rawlsianism can serve as a grounding theory of justice. Of course, there are alternatives. I have nothing said about Michael Walzer. I have nothing said about Amartya Sen or Martha Nussbaum, but I hope that I can defend a Rawlsian approach in a theory of justice. In environmental ethics, I have deep anthropocentrism as a grounding theory with different moments or components. I would include animal welfare, but I'm critical against animal rights. So I argue in favor of a future of domestication, not in favor of the abolition of domestication. Maybe in a natural society, we will have new modes of humane domestication. I have distinguished different concepts and made a reasonable choice in favor of strong sustainability. And then I tried to harbor other ideas. I tried to harbor Aldo Leopold's principle of land ethics. I tried to integrate and harbor the 3 or 4 pillar model and give a guideline to each so-called pillar. And the pillars are not isolated building blocks, they have to concrete. And then I have an open set of applications with special concept, I think, of climate or biodiversity, and so on and so on. Um, I would say that sustainability is not a theory about everything. So this set of application must be finite. And then, of course, there might be contested elements. Does the indebtedness of the state, we have debated in recent days and weeks, does the indebtedness of state belongs to the set of application or not? Are criminal rates a part of the set of application? Gender relations, drug addictions. There are so many societal problems, important and serious societal problems, which might fall outside of the set of application. So the point I wish to make is there is a contested borderline which delineates the set of application to the outside, which is not part of a theory of sustainability anymore. And by going through this layer model, in the end, I can come back to the first layer and said, okay, this is the way how we should continue the intellectual tradition going back to Karlowitz, Liebig, Möbius, and others. So this is a way to, Gadamer hat es in Deutsch einmal gesagt, wir rücken ein in Traditionen. Wir rücken in Traditionen ein, indem wir sie fortsetzen. We continue and then we become, if we are very happy, a member of a tradition. Final point is about the epistemological reflection. I would say that sustainability is not a scientific discipline on its own. There is a lot of interdisciplinarity within this research field, so to say, but there's also participation, local knowledge, and citizen science. With Imre Lakatos, I would say theories are research programs. And if strong sustainability is a kind of theory, it must be or become a research program. and it is an inter and a transdisciplinary one. In this famous article, Snow distinguished two cultures, the culture of the humanities, and I stem from the culture of the humanities, and the culture of science and technology. And maybe we can overcome this divide into cultures, and maybe sustainability science is a third culture of scholarship, which combines elements of the humanities and elements of the scientific and technological study. So, sustainability science is neither hard science because it entails normativity. It is not hard science, but it is not classical humanities. Maybe there is a third culture in the making. Theoretical course and theoretical network, or better, I said, okay, there is a distinction between explorative, paradigmatic, and post-paradigmatic periods in theory formation. And we had a lot of exploration in the 80s and in the 90s. What is sustainable development? And now I must presume and I must claim that strong sustainability is a paradigmatic um, um, point, or this becomes a paradigm in the Kuhnian sense. This would imply that Popper's Hydra model holds for sustainable science or for this paradigm as well, because we generate even more sophisticated, even more detailed questions. And then maybe in the future, there might be normal sustainability science as continued epistemic progress. But in the last years, the boundary conditions have changed. What we see at the moment, and this is my final slide, we see a return of archaic geopolitics, war against Ukraine. We see the claim for new territories by conquest, plundering of resources. Back to fossil fuels, global emissions are 37 gigatons per year. We see a decline in the UN regimes. We see great powers and spheres of hegemony. And we see parochial doctrines as Maga, Dugin, Chinese civilization, Ummah, and these parochial doctrines are not in line with sustainability, as I would say. We should remember that there was a time where the idea was lost in defeat and it was ignored in the years between 1914 and 1995. I do not say that we are in this situation now, but from the history of sustainability, I know that there were decades where sustainability was ignored and defeated. And I hoped, I dearly hope, that these decades will not return. The more optimistic outlook would be this. Capitalism performs in long waves, the so-called Kontrajev cycles. And we have seen 5 Kontrajev cycles since the origins of industrial capitalism in 1800. And these long waves, and maybe at the moment we are on the edge or at the bifurcation point between a more, I would say, a more high tech long wave, maybe satellites, robotics, digital, artificial intelligence on the one hand, and maybe on the other hand, there is a bit of hope, a grain of hope for a more green, sustainable, green Kontrajev cycles, which would contribute to sustainable development. But this is at the moment not much more than a grain of hope. But the final message, what we have to combat against at the moment, there should be resistance against the looming dark age of sustainability. So thanks a lot for the attention, and I think there is 10 or 15 minutes left for debate. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much, Conrad, for this very interesting and clear presentation. I particularly liked that you pointed out the need for overcoming the barriers between humanities and on the one hand and science and technology on the other hand. I think your talk made a great contribution in that direction, and it's now open for discussion.